Hello and welcome everyone to the GSMC College Football Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. We have a great show for you today. Not our usual day we are on, but trying to figure out some technical issues on my end and hoping that this goes through smoothly. But today we're going to do one quick segment and is going to be about the recruiting schedule. There have been a couple of proposed changes that could take effect this next year. And if they were to, I think a lot of coaches around the country would be very happy. But before we start, I do want to call your attention to us getting a lot of questions throughout the show. We do have questions come in throughout the show, and we would like for them to come through as quickly as possible. And the best way to do that is to use the link at the bottom of the screen, streamelements.com/gsmcsportsnetwork./tip. It's a huge help not only to us here at the network, but also to you all to get your questions read early, and maybe we can have a fun back and forth here while we're live. So let's go ahead and start up. We got a lot of changes happening around college football. Obviously, the playoff and conference realignment are running rampant around college football right now. But some of the changes have not made a ton of people very happy. Let's be honest. Around the country, there are a lot of college football fans that are a little discouraged by the recent happenings around the sport. And I think one of the biggest things that has been discouraging people a lot of the time has been a lot of really great coaches walking away from the game. We saw tons of coaches. I think it's around 26 different coaches at this point have decided to move to the NFL. And a lot of that has to do with the schedule that coaches have to work in this sport. College football is a very intense sport that really never rests, and that is especially true with the introduction of the transfer portal and NIL and things of that nature. It's created a lot of work for these really, really good coaches, and it's become a little bit unsustainable for these guys. So the NCAA has taken notice. Commissioners around the different conferences has taken notice, but Nicole Auerbach a couple of days ago came out with a report talking about the possibility of moving the early signing period up to the beginning of December. And obviously this would be a huge deal because December has kind of been the month that coaches have been the most upset about in the past. It's been the one that's kind of stood out among coaches because there's so many things going on, right? There's recruiting, like normal recruiting leading up to the early signing day, which is usually on the 20th. Normally, this would move it up to the 4th if it were to take effect this year. But all of this stuff is happening, right? You got recruiting, you have transfer portal recruiting, you have recruiting your own players, which is a little thing that did not used to exist, I'll be totally honest. So very, very new thing there. And also, if you're in a bowl game, you have to, deal with all that. So tons of stuff happening around you in the month of December, and they've started to take action to kind of rectify that a little bit. And they've also thrown out the idea of possibly having an even earlier signing day in the summer at some point. Now, I'm not sure how many recruits would actually really partake in that signing day, but at the end of the day, there are some kids that would really like to get it out of the way, be, a college senior, or high school senior, be a high school senior, totally normal life for that last season and just enjoy it. So I think while it would be used sparingly, it is a helpful thing to add, not only for the recruits, but for the coaches, so we can get at least some of their class locked up before they start the season in earnest. And I think there's a lot of unknowns with the December date in particular because we don't know how many kids will use this, right? It's an ever-changing world where a lot of kids, push their recruitments off a little bit or take it right down to the wire and have a lot of coaches worried around the country. And I think if you push it even forward in the month of December a couple of weeks, it'll be interesting to see how many kids decide to wait till the February signing date to actually sign with their team. And I think that's totally fine. I mean, more power to them, however they want to go through this process. But it would change the way that recruiting works, right? You would push for certain kids to sign early because, you need some kids. and then other kids you might not necessarily push quite as hard for, because you know that they're probably going to push off till February, and you have all this time to deal with that down the road a little bit. But one of the big reasoning behind this happening was the transfer portal and recruiting schedule overlapping, and it was crazy to begin with. If I'm being totally honest, the idea that these coaches have to deal with recruiting kids from high school and flying around to different high schools on their fancy little helicopters, and then get back in the car, go back to the campus, and start recruiting grown men. It's two totally different tactics, two totally different pitches, and it creates a lot of, just a ton of work for these coaches around the part of the season where they should either be able to, take a deep breath and maybe take a little bit of a break for a time if the season didn't end how you wanted to, or prepare for a bowl game, which is obviously what all these coaches want to be doing around that time of year. And recruiting is not necessarily the top of their list. So I think moving this up obviously creates much more time in December for these coaches to do what they do best, which is coach football. And I think it also will give these recruiting visits in November and October that much more importance, right? You won't have the ability to get these guys in late on in the cycle. You won't have the ability to get them in even for like bowl game practices, which is kind of a fun recruiting tactic that some people have employed recently. And I think it does create even better recruitment atmosphere in November and in October around those visits, because it's the last couple you're going to take. So I think overall, I think it's a really cool thing. I think a lot of kids will use their official visits around the season, and that's obviously a great thing, because you want to see the biggest recruits out there battling and out there, showing them on your TV and getting excited as a fan, hoping that they'll commit to your team that weekend. So I think overall it's a absolute slam dunk in my eyes. I think there's not much of a question here. I'm hoping that the Big Sky commissioner, who was the one that kind of first brought this to Nicole Auerbach's attention, I hope him and his colleagues can get together and figure this out for this upcoming season, because it could be a huge help to coaches, to recruits, to the players on the team, all of these things that it could really, at the very least, help subside some of the not so great news that college football fans have had to deal with recently. And that's obviously something that, college football, at least hopefully, is trying to rectify, and will slowly start making steps in the right direction. I think, I've talked about, a lot of different things changing throughout the sport a lot. And I think one of the things I've had to, keep into perspective is one of the big things with this sport going forward is it's all about making it a little bit better. And there's a lot of different places where I feel like we might be moving in kind of the wrong direction there. But there is, there is that 1% that we're getting a little bit better, hopefully this upcoming year in the recruiting schedule. And hopefully it's keeping some of the really, really good coaches around a little bit longer, because burnout is real in this job. And obviously they get paid very handsomely to do this job. Kenny Dillingham has said pretty much with his chest that if you don't like recruiting, if you don't like working hard, if you don't like doing the things that they're asked to do, leave. I would hope they wouldn't. I would hope they would think a little bit longer about that decision, because it is a real thing. Burnout in this season is a real thing. It's 12 straight weeks of putting everything on the table on Saturday, and then you have to, fly to different high schools. You have to recruit different kids in different ways. You have to do a million different things and pulled in so many different directions, and especially in December. And now, at least that subsided just a little bit. And I think all of this conference realignment and playoff expansion and all of these different things that are changing, at least this is one thing that I feel like everyone can kind of get behind. One of the details of this to keep in mind is we don't know whether or not it'll be a full 7 days opening for these kids to sign or a 3 day opening. I tend to lean it should be a 3 day just because I think having that, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and then being done by conference championship weekend, which is when this would be right before, I think would not only be beneficial for the coaches that have to sign these classes, but also I think there's been a lot of fans that have complained that December is no longer about the games, right? It's always about recruiting and the transfer portal and all these different things going on around the sport, except for the sport. And there's so many great bowl games that happen around that time. There's so many great games, whether it's conference championships or bowl games around that time, and it feels like it's been overshadowed in recent years by the craziness that is December in this sport. So I'm happy we are at least on the road to decluttering it a little bit. I'm happy that something is getting better in the sport, at least 1% better, because that's the most important thing, right? So obviously still a lot of work to do in even the recruiting calendar and the calendar in general, but as of right now, the meetings are set to start next week, Wednesday and Thursday, and they're hoping these changes could be implemented by early March, so that would make way for it to be in effect in the 2024 season. So it'd be very interesting to see how recruiting heats up in the summer with possibly an early signing window in August or late July where these kids could sign, because there are a lot of kids in the 2025 class that are incredibly talented. I mean, one of the kids, the number one recruit in the country, Bryce Underwood, is already committed to LSU. I bet if this passed, there would be a lot of teams that would be calling him very, very quickly, because you got to get this kid locked in as quickly as possible. So LSU will obviously be pushing much harder for him, but other schools as well. You want to get in as quickly as possible, especially with a possible summer signing period. And then if you get towards the end of the season and maybe LSU is struggling a little bit, maybe some teams will start to poach even more. But as for right now, the recruiting schedule is getting just a little bit better. College football is getting just a little bit better for these coaches and these players, and that's always the goal. So very happy to see that. I hope that this stream went off without a hitch. Thank you all for tuning in to the GSMC College Football Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support does mean a lot to us. Please remember to subscribe and leave a positive review. It's a super huge help to us at the network. And also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram for all the updates across every single sport you could think of. We have so many great people here doing a lot of great work on tons of different topics. So definitely follow us on all the different social pages. But thank you once again, and have a wonderful day.